The scorching sun beat down on Theresa Bentley's tear-streaked face as she strained against the ropes binding her wrists to the wooden post in Redemption's town square. Her crime nothing more than defending herself against the unwanted advances of the mayor's son. The year was 1876, and Redemption, Colorado was a town where justice often favored those with money and influence. At 22, Theresa had learned this lesson the hard way, working as a seamstress in Mrs. Holloway's dress shop had barely provided enough to survive after fleeing her uncle's farm in Kansas, where she'd endured years of mistreatment following her parents' deaths. 2 more hours in the sun ought to teach you some respect, Sheriff Jenkins had sneered while securing her bonds that morning. Count yourself lucky the mayor didn't press for worse punishment. Theresa's throat burned with thirst, her simple blue dress clung to her body with sweat, and her honey blonde hair had come loose from its pins, falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. 6 hours she'd stood there already, a spectacle for the townsfolk who passed by with judgmental glares or, worse, prying eyes that lingered too long. She closed her eyes against another wave of dizziness. No one would help her. Mrs. Holloway had been sympathetic but powerless against the mayor's influence. The women of the town kept their distance, afraid of association. The men either leered or looked away, the sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered until a shadow fell across her face. Theresa forced her eyes open, squinting against the harsh light. A tall figure dismounted from a chestnut stallion. The man's face was partially obscured by the brim of his worn leather hat, but she could make out a strong jawline dusted with several days' worth of stubble. His duster was coated with the dust of the trail, and the spurs on his boots jingled softly as he approached. "What's the meaning of this?" His voice was deep, carrying the hint of a southern accent. Theresa said nothing, too exhausted and humiliated to explain. "She struck the mayor's son," called out a man lounging outside the saloon. "Got what she deserved." The stranger turned toward Theresa, and she could now see eyes the color of a summer storm gray with flecks of blue. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her cracked lips, the bruise forming on her cheek, and the dignified way she held herself despite her circumstances. Without another word, he reached for the knife at his belt. Theresa tensed, unsure of his intentions until he stepped behind the post and began sawing through the ropes. "What do you think you're doing?" Sheriff Jenkins emerged from his office, hand resting on his holster. "Cutting loose a woman who doesn't deserve this treatment," the stranger replied calmly, continuing his work. "That's interference with justice, mister. I don't know who you are. Name's Lucas Addison." The last rope gave way, and Theresa nearly collapsed as her arms came free. Lucas caught her with a steady hand. "And this isn't justice." The sheriff's face reddened. "You've got no authority here, Addison." Lucas helped Theresa stand upright, keeping a supportive arm around her waist. "Maybe not, but I've got a good sense of right and wrong." He turned to Theresa, his voice softening. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly, though her legs trembled beneath her. "Good." He guided her toward his horse. "You're coming home with me." The sheriff stepped forward. "Now wait just a minute." In one fluid motion, Lucas drew his revolver. He didn't aim it directly at the sheriff, but the message was clear. "Step back, Sheriff. I'm not looking for trouble, but I won't leave this woman to your idea of justice." A tense silence fell over the square. Theresa held her breath, feeling the town's eyes upon them. Finally, a new voice broke the standoff. "Let them go, Jenkins." All eyes turned to see Judge Harmon, the circuit judge who had arrived in town just that morning. "But sir," the sheriff protested. "I've heard enough about this situation from the townspeople," the judge said, approaching slowly. "The evidence suggests Miss Bentley was merely defending herself. This punishment is excessive." The sheriff's jaw clenched, but he stepped back. Lucas holstered his weapon and helped Theresa mount his horse before swinging up behind her. "Thank you, Judge," Lucas said with a respectful nod. Judge Harmon nodded in return. "Justice should be blind to a man's position, Sheriff. Remember that." As they rode out of town, Theresa's body sagged against Lucas's chest, her resistance finally giving way to exhaustion. "Why?" she managed to whisper. "Why what?" His voice rumbled against her back. Why help me? You don't know me. Lucas was quiet for a moment, guiding his horse along the dusty trail leading north out of town. I know enough, he finally said. I know a good person being wronged when I see one. The journey to Lucas's homestead took nearly 2 hours, during which Theresa drifted in and out of consciousness. When she fully came to, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across unfamiliar land. A modest cabin came into view, nestled against a backdrop of pine trees with a small creek running nearby. A corral stood to one side, currently empty save for a dappled mare that nickered at their approach. It's not much, Lucas said as he helped her down from the horse, but it's peaceful. You'll be safe here. Theresa's legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and Lucas caught her with strong hands. Easy now, let's get you inside. The cabin's interior was simple but well kept. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a wooden table and chairs nearby. A curtain partially separated the main room from what appeared to be a sleeping area. Lucas guided her to a chair and fetched a cup of water from a bucket by the door. Drink slowly, he advised, handing it to her. Theresa sipped gratefully, feeling life return to her parched body. As her senses cleared, uncertainty set in. She was alone with a stranger miles from town. I appreciate your help, Mr. Addison, but I can't stay here, she said, setting down the cup. I have nothing to offer in return for your kindness. Lucas shook his head as he stoked the fire. I'm not looking for payment, Miss Bentley, and where would you go? Back to redemption. She faltered, knowing he was right. I had a small room above the dress shop, but after today. After today, you need time to recover and figure out your next steps, he finished for her. I have a spare bedroll, you can have the bed. In the morning, we can talk about what comes next. Suspicion warred with gratitude in her heart. Why would you do this for a stranger? Lucas stood, his tall frame silhouetted against the firelight. Because 7 years ago, no one did the same for my sister when she needed it. Something dark passed over his features. Now, let me see to your wrists. He gathered supplies, a basin of water, clean cloths, and a jar of salve, and knelt before her. With surprising gentleness for such large hands, he bathed the raw skin where the ropes had cut into her. What happened to your sister? Theresa asked softly. Lucas's hands paused momentarily. She was accused of stealing from the general store where she worked. The owner was improper with her. When she refused him, he claimed she'd been taking money from the till. His jaw tightened. I was away driving cattle to Kansas City. By the time I returned, they'd already held the trial. She died in prison of fever 3 months later. I'm sorry, Theresa whispered. He nodded once, resuming his ministrations. So am I. Now let's get you something to eat, and then you should rest. Over a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, Theresa found herself telling Lucas about the events that had led to her punishment. The mayor's son, Edward, had been coming to the dress shop for weeks, claiming to need gifts for his mother. Yesterday, he cornered me in the back room. She stared into her coffee cup. When his hands started wandering, I picked up the nearest thing, a pair of sewing shears, and threatened him with them. He backed away, but not before I scratched his cheek. And let me guess, Lucas said, his version of events differed somewhat. According to him, I made advances, then attacked him when he rejected me. Theresa's laugh was bitter. By morning, I was arrested for assault and public indecency. Lucas's expression darkened. Men like that are the reason I prefer the company of horses and cattle to people most days. As the evening progressed, Theresa learned that Lucas had come to Colorado after the war, where he'd fought for the Union despite his Tennessee upbringing. He'd built this homestead over the past 5 years, raising horses and small herds of cattle that he drove to market twice yearly. It's a solitary life, he admitted, but it suits me. Don't you get lonely? The question slipped out before Theresa could stop it. A slight smile touched his lips. I have my thoughts for company, and the animals don't judge. When exhaustion finally overtook her, Lucas insisted she take his bed while he rolled out a blanket near the fire. Despite her protests, he wouldn't hear otherwise. Sleep as long as you need, he said, disappearing behind the curtain to give her privacy. Alone in his bed, surrounded by the unfamiliar scent of leather and pine, Theresa finally allowed herself to cry, not from pain or fear, but from the overwhelming relief of unexpected kindness. The following days established a cautious routine. Lucas rose before dawn to tend to his horses and the small garden behind the cabin. Theresa, determined not to be a burden, took over cooking and mending his clothes, which were in dire need of attention. On the third day, Lucas returned from town with supplies and news. "The judge had a word with Mrs. Holloway," he reported as he unloaded parcels. "Your position at the dress shop is still open if you want it." Theresa's hands stilled over the stew she was stirring, and Edward. The judge convinced the mayor that pressing the matter would only bring unwanted scrutiny to his son's behavior. Lucas's expression was grim, not justice, but perhaps the best outcome possible. "I can't go back there," Theresa said softly. "Not yet." Lucas nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." As days stretched into weeks, Theresa found herself watching Lucas when he wasn't looking the way the muscles in his forearms flexed as he chopped wood. How his face transformed when he allowed himself a rare smile, the gentleness with which he treated the animals in his care. For his part, Lucas began finding reasons to return to the cabin during the day to fetch water, to check if she needed anything from town, to share a midday meal. Their conversations grew longer, more personal, and Theresa discovered a thoughtfulness in him that belied his rugged exterior. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Lucas turned to her. "Would you consider staying?" he asked abruptly. Theresa's heart quickened. "Staying here with me," he cleared his throat. "I know it's not much compared to town life, but why?" she interrupted, needing to understand his intentions. Lucas looked away, his profile sharp against the fading light. "Because the cabin feels like a home with you in it," he said simply. "Because I find myself thinking about you when we're apart, because I haven't felt this way about anyone before." The honesty in his voice stole her breath. "Lucas, you don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "Just think about it." That night, sleep eluded Theresa as she considered his words. She'd come to care for him, more than she'd allowed herself to acknowledge. But could she build a life here, so far from everything familiar? Morning found her still awake, a decision forming in her heart. She rose early and prepared breakfast, waiting for Lucas to return from his morning chores. When he entered, hat in hand and uncertainty in his eyes, she knew her answer. "I'd like to stay," she said before he could speak, "but not as your guest or housekeeper." "What then?" His voice was guarded, hopeful. "As your partner, your equal." She met his gaze steadily. "I won't be beholden to another man's charity, Lucas. If I stay, it's because we both choose it day after day." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I wouldn't have it any other way." That afternoon, they rode together to a meadow Lucas had been meaning to show her, wildflowers carpeting the ground in a riot of colors. As they spread a blanket for their picnic, the conversation turned to the future. "I've been thinking about expanding the horse breeding operation," Lucas said, leaning back on his elbows. "There's good money in it, and with the railroad pushing west, demand is only going to increase." "You'd need more hands for that," Theresa observed, arranging the food she'd packed. "I would, maybe 2 or 3 reliable men," he glanced at her. "And a proper house, not just a cabin." Theresa's fingers stilled. "A house, with separate bedrooms," he added hurriedly, "and a real kitchen for you, maybe even one of those cast iron stoves they're selling in Denver." A slow smile spread across her face. "Lucas Addison, are you making plans that include me?" He sat up, suddenly serious. "I am. Does that frighten you?" "No," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "It doesn't." Lucas reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know it's too soon to speak of certain things, but I want you to know that my intentions are honorable." "I never doubted that," she replied softly. His eyes, so often guarded, were open to her now, revealing a depth of feeling that made her breath catch. Slowly, he leaned forward, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Theresa met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that spoke of promise and possibility. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she leaned into his touch, savoring the connection. When they finally parted, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you stand proud despite everything they did to you." "I'm glad you waited until I wasn't tied to a post," she teased, and his surprised laugh sent warmth spreading through her chest. As summer turned to fall, Theresa and Lucas settled into a partnership that grew stronger with each passing day. She accompanied him to the horse auction in Denver, where her sharp eye for detail and talent for negotiation proved invaluable. With the profits, they began construction on a proper house, working side by side with the hired builders. News from Redemption occasionally reached them. The mayor's son had been sent east to attend university, a development that brought Theresa quiet satisfaction. Mrs. Holloway had written to express her gladness at hearing of Theresa's new circumstances, though she lamented the loss of her best seamstress. On a crisp October evening, with the aspen trees glowing gold in the fading light, Lucas took Theresa's hand as they walked back from inspecting the house's progress. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. Theresa's heart skipped. "Yes." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. I never thought I'd find someone who understands me the way you do. Lucas, please, let me finish before I lose my nerve." He took a deep breath. "I know we agreed to be partners, equals in this venture, but I find myself wanting to call you my wife, to build not just a business but a family with you." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box. Inside lay a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of hers I managed to keep after the war." Tears welled in Theresa's eyes as he knelt before her, the gesture so at odds with his usual reserve. "Theresa Bentley, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Lucas, yes." His smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger was brighter than she'd ever seen it. When he stood and gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement, her laughter rang out across the homestead. They were married 2 weeks later by Judge Harmon, who had become a friend and occasional visitor. The ceremony was small, just a few neighbors, and the men who worked for Lucas, but filled with genuine warmth. "I never thought the day I was tied to that post would lead to this," Theresa confessed that night as they lay together in their new home, her head resting on Lucas's chest. "It seemed like the worst day of my life." "For me too," he admitted, stroking her hair. "I'd ridden into Redemption just looking to resupply before heading home when I saw you there." His arms tightened around her. "Something inside me couldn't ride away." "I'm glad you didn't," she murmured, tilting her face up for his kiss. Winter came early that year, blanketing the land in snow and keeping them close to home. They spent the long evenings planning for spring, which fields to plant, how many more horses to breed, whether to expand the cattle operation. "We should hire a foreman," Theresa suggested one night as they sat before the fire. "Someone experienced with cattle. You can't manage everything yourself, especially if we're going to expand." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. I've been too used to doing things on my own." "Not anymore," she reminded him, squeezing his hand. As winter gave way to spring, their plans began to take shape. A foreman was hired, Malcolm Ross, a weathered man with 20 years of ranch experience and a quiet competence that earned Lucas's respect. 2 more hands followed, bringing new energy to the homestead. With the additional help, Lucas could spend more time with Theresa, teaching her to ride properly, not side saddle, she'd insisted, and taking her on excursions to the more remote parts of their land. It was during one such ride, as they stopped to rest by a mountain stream, that Theresa shared her news. "I've been feeling different lately," she began, watching Lucas's expression carefully. "Tired in the mornings, certain foods don't agree with me," his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you ill?" "We should ride to town, see the doctor. I already spoke with Mrs. Jameson," she interrupted, referring to the midwife who lived on the neighboring property. "She confirmed what I suspected." Taking a deep breath, she placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Lucas." The transformation of his face from confusion to shock to overwhelming joy was something she would remember all her days. He gathered her in his arms with such tenderness, as if she had suddenly become fragile as spun glass. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though his reaction had already given her the answer. Happy doesn't begin to describe it. He pulled back to look into her eyes. Terrified, overwhelmed, ecstatic, all of those at once. Theresa laughed. "That makes two of us." As her body changed with the growing life inside her, Lucas became even more protective, though he was careful not to smother her independence. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving intricate patterns of horses and wildflowers into the wood. Theresa sewed tiny garments in the evenings, smiling at Lucas's wonder when he held them up. "They're so small," he marveled, a finger tracing the edge of a gown. "Babies generally are," she teased. The house, once so spacious for just the two of them, now felt like it was waiting for something or someone to make it complete. In late autumn, as the first snow dusted the mountain peaks, Theresa's labor began. Lucas paced outside their bedroom while Mrs. Jameson and her assistant attended to Theresa, his face drawn with worry each time he heard her cry out. After 12 hours that felt like an eternity, the sound Lucas had been waiting for finally came, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Mrs. Jameson appeared at the door, her lined face breaking into a smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Addison, you have a daughter." Lucas entered the room on unsteady legs to find Theresa propped up against the pillows, her face flushed and radiant despite her exhaustion. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your daughter," Theresa said softly. Sitting carefully on the edge of the bed, Lucas found himself looking into a perfect miniature face, rosebud lips, button nose, and a wisp of dark hair that promised to be as black as his own. "She's beautiful," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "like her mother." "I thought we might name her Hope," Theresa suggested, "because that's what you gave me when you cut me loose that day." Lucas nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Instead, he leaned forward to press a kiss to Theresa's forehead, then one to his daughter's. In that moment, with his wife and child safe in his arms, Lucas Addison, once a solitary man who preferred the company of horses to people, knew he had found his true purpose. Over the years that followed, the Addison ranch flourished, as did their family. Hope was joined by a brother, Samuel, 2 years later, and eventually by a sister, Elizabeth. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family, and the reputation of Addison horses spread throughout the territory. Redemption changed too. The old mayor was voted out, replaced by a merchant with a stronger sense of justice. When Lucas and Theresa occasionally visited town for supplies or social events, they were greeted with respect rather than whispers. On the 10th anniversary of the day Lucas had cut Theresa free, they returned to the spot by the stream where she had told him about her first pregnancy. Now it was a favorite family picnic location, though today they had come alone, leaving the children in the capable hands of their housekeeper. 10 years, Theresa mused, leaning against Lucas's shoulder as they sat on a blanket. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday and sometimes like another lifetime." "The best 10 years of my life," Lucas replied, his arm around her waist. At 40, his hair had begun to show threads of silver at the temples, but his eyes were still that same storm gray that had captured her attention from the beginning, even with all the challenges. The drought 2 years ago, the time Hope decided to free all the horses, Samuel's broken arm from falling out of the apple tree, Lucas laughed. Even with all of that, especially with all of that, Theresa turned in his arms to face him. At 32, she remained as beautiful to him as the day they met, though her face now held the quiet confidence of a woman who knew her worth and her place in the world. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't ridden into Redemption that day?" she asked. "I try not to," he admitted. "The thought of never having known you, never having our children." He shook his head. "I can't imagine it, nor can I." She rested her palm against his cheek, thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "Thank you for cutting me loose, Lucas Addison. Thank you for bringing me home. Thank you for staying," he replied simply, before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that still held all the promise of their first. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land they had built together, Theresa reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a punishment post in a dusty town square to this life of love and purpose, it wasn't a path she could have imagined, but it was one she would choose again without hesitation. Hand in hand, they walked back toward the lights of home, where their children waited, their future stretching before them as vast and full of possibility as the western sky above.